I froze in the kitchen, my hands gripping the sponge so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what I had just heard. Charles and Irene were sitting at the small breakfast table in the corner, their heads bent together, whispering. My parents, people I had always trusted, people I loved, were planning to lie about something as serious as Alzheimer's just to get into my house. I couldn't believe it. I dropped the sponge into the sink, the water spilling over, and took a cautious step closer. Irene's voice was soft, almost conspiratorial, but every word cut like a knife. If we pretend your memory's getting worse, she'll feel obligated to take us in, she said. I felt my stomach twist. Obligated? After everything I had done for them, after all the years I had cared for them, they were plotting to trap me with lies and guilt. I sank onto a chair, trying to calm my shaking hands. I thought back to the years I had spent helping them, making sure they were comfortable, keeping their bills paid, driving them to appointments. I had given so much, and now it felt like they were trying to take more, not just money or time, but my home, my peace, my life. I remembered how my brother Ethan had always been their favorite, how he got away with everything while I carried the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about Alzheimer's or my house. It was about control, manipulation, and betrayal, and I had been blind to it until now. I debated whether I should confront them then and there. Part of me wanted to stand up, demand answers, scream at them for thinking I could be so easily fooled. But another part of me knew that confronting them without a plan would only give them the upper hand. They were experts at twisting situations, at making me feel guilty for even thinking I deserved better. Instead, I stayed quiet, watching them as they laughed softly about something trivial, pretending nothing had happened. My mind raced. I had to protect myself and my house. I had to gather proof. I would need evidence if I was going to stop them from manipulating me. I couldn't let them make me the villain in their story while they got everything they wanted. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the whispers in my head, trying to figure out my next move. I thought about calling a lawyer friend, getting records, documenting everything. I knew this would be a battle, but I also knew I couldn't let them win. They had spent years taking advantage of my kindness, but this time, I would be smarter. I would protect myself, and I would expose their lies. For the first time, I realized that the people I loved the most could also hurt me the deepest. And from that moment on, I promised myself I would never let them manipulate me again. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, my mind wandering back to my childhood. My brother Ethan had always been the favorite. No matter what he did, my parents praised him, celebrated him, and forgave him for mistakes that I would have been scolded for a dozen times over. I remember winning a writing contest in middle school, and while my parents nodded politely, they threw a huge party when Ethan got a small loan for one of his business ideas. I had always tried to be proud of him, but the favoritism stung. When our family home was sold after my parents decided to downsize, the money didn't go to any fair division or to help me start my own life. It went straight to Ethan. He had sunk into debt with one of his failed ventures, and my parents bailed him out without even asking me. I had worked hard for years, taking extra shifts at the hospital and saving every penny I could, yet when it came to fairness, I got nothing. The resentment I had buried for so long started bubbling up again. Despite all of this, I had always tried to be the good daughter. I took care of small things without complaint, fixing the leaky faucet, replacing broken appliances, making sure groceries were stocked. I drove my parents to appointments when they couldn't drive themselves and helped them with their bills whenever they needed it. I thought I was being kind and responsible, but now I realized it had been taken for granted. They saw it as my duty, not as a gift. Inevitably, the anger mixed with a sharp clarity. I could see the pattern now. The whispering in the kitchen wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest move in a long history of manipulation and favoritism. Ethan had always benefited from their schemes, and now they thought I would too, simply because they claimed I owed them. The thought made my blood boil. It hit me that my parents didn't see me as a person with my own life, my own home, and my own rules. To them, I was a resource, a caregiver, a convenient solution for all their problems. They had spent years taking and expecting more without giving anything back. And yet, even with all of that, I had loved them. I had hoped they would see me someday, appreciate me, respect me. But now, their plan to trick me into letting them into my home showed me exactly who they were. I clenched my fists, breathing deeply. That compassion I had carried for years, the loyalty, the care, the patience, was slowly turning into something sharper. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. This wasn't just about protecting my house. It was about standing up for myself, setting boundaries, and finally taking control of my own life. The anger that rose inside me was steady and cold, a fuel I knew I could use to fight back. For the first time in years, I felt ready. Ready to stop being the victim in their games. Ready to protect what was mine. Ready to make sure they couldn't pull the same tricks on me ever again. The next morning, I decided I couldn't let it go. I had to bring up what I'd heard, but I knew I needed to stay calm. I found my parents in the living room, sipping coffee and chatting quietly. I took a deep breath and asked, "Mom, Dad, I think I overheard something yesterday. You were talking about pretending memory issues." My mother's expression softened instantly. She reached out and touched my hand, her voice syrupy and gentle. "Oh, honey, you must have misunderstood. We were talking about your aunt. She's having some trouble remembering things lately. It's nothing to worry about." I froze for a moment, hoping her explanation was true, but something didn't feel right. Charles kept avoiding my eyes, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. He mumbled something about the coffee being too strong, but it was clear he wasn't answering me. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. My stomach sank when I read it. "Hey, just curious, if Mom and Dad ever couldn't live alone, you'd help them, right?" The way he phrased it made my skin crawl. It wasn't casual concern, it was probing. I set my phone down and watched their reactions carefully. The more I observed, the more obvious it became. This wasn't confusion, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was coordinated. They were testing me, seeing how I would react, planting ideas, and trying to gauge whether I would give in. I felt a mixture of shock and anger rising inside me. For years, I had been careful not to upset my parents, to respect them, to help them whenever they needed it. And yet, here they were, pretending innocence, trying to manipulate me into something I hadn't agreed to. The betrayal hit harder because it was so deliberate, so methodical. I tried to keep my voice steady, asking again, "Are you saying this is about my aunt, not you?" Irene gave me that same sweet smile, nodding slowly. Charles still avoided my gaze. My mind raced, connecting the dots from yesterday. The whispers, the sneaky smiles, Ethan's strange messages, it all added up. I realized I needed to be careful. They were skilled at turning situations, at making me question my own memory or judgment. If I reacted with anger now, they could use it against me later. But I also knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to start thinking strategically, documenting everything, watching for patterns, and protecting myself. By the time I left that morning, I felt a cold determination settle in me. I could no longer rely on trust alone. I had to be vigilant, not just for my house, but for my peace of mind. They were plotting, and now I knew it. And this time, I wouldn't be their victim. 2 weeks later, the manipulation started in small but obvious ways. I received a call from Charles one morning, his voice full of concern. "Laura, you left the stove on when you visited, didn't you?" I almost burned the kitchen down. My heart skipped a beat, but I knew it was a lie. I had checked the stove myself before leaving. Later that week, Irene called, sounding frail and worried. She claimed she couldn't remember if she had paid the electricity bill and asked if I could take care of it for them. It was strange. They had never asked me for money this directly before. My suspicion grew stronger when Ethan called the same day. He sounded earnest, almost panicked. "Mom and Dad aren't doing well. You know, you're a nurse. You should really help them if things get worse." I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just about the house anymore. They were trying to manipulate me emotionally. Their plan was becoming clearer. They wanted me to feel guilty and responsible for their care. I decided to see for myself and drove over unannounced one afternoon. When I arrived, I saw Irene outside, chatting and laughing with neighbors, carrying a basket of groceries. She looked perfectly fine. My chest tightened as I watched her. When she noticed me, she stopped, blinked, and hesitated. Then she smiled weakly and said, I'm sorry, who are you again?" My jaw tightened. I felt a mix of disbelief and anger. She was pretending to forget me, right in front of me, and yet she had been perfectly capable just moments ago. Charles avoided my gaze and muttered something about checking the mail, clearly uncomfortable with me noticing. Everything clicked in my mind. The calls, the fake confusion, Ethan's probing questions, they were staging everything. They were practicing their act to make me feel obligated to take them in. The betrayal cut deep. The people I had loved and cared for all my life were now deliberately trying to manipulate me. I took a deep breath to steady myself. I realized I had to be careful. If I reacted with anger or tried to expose them immediately, they could twist it into proof that I was abusive or uncaring. I needed to document everything, gather evidence, and approach this strategically. As I left their house that day, I felt a cold clarity settle in. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary lapse. It was a plan, and I was the target. I had to protect myself, my home, and my peace of mind. I knew from that moment on, I couldn't take anything at face value with them. Every word, every action had to be watched carefully. They were experts at manipulation, but I was done being fooled. For the first time, I felt fully awake to their intentions. I realized that kindness alone wouldn't save me this time. I had to be strong, deliberate, and ready to fight back. The game had begun, and now I knew the rules. One morning, my phone rang, and the voice on the other end made my stomach drop. "Hello, is this Laura Mitchell? I'm calling from Adult Protective Services regarding a complaint about your parents," the officer said. My heart started pounding. I listened as she explained that someone had reported me for neglecting my sick parents. I couldn't believe it. The officer continued, saying an anonymous caller claimed my parents had dementia and that I refused to let them live with me. I froze. There was no doubt in my mind who had made the call. It was deliberate, a calculated attack on me, designed to pressure me into giving in to their plan. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and hurt. My parents, the people I had loved and cared for all my life, were now using lies to try to ruin my reputation. Worse, they were willing to involve outside authorities just to manipulate me. My chest tightened as the reality sank in. I ended the call and immediately started gathering evidence. I called their doctor's office and requested the most recent cognitive evaluations for both Charles and Irene. The results came back quickly, completely normal. There was no sign of Alzheimer's or any other cognitive decline. The contrast between the clean evaluations and the false claims they were making was stark. Sitting at my kitchen table, medical records in hand, I felt a sharp sting of betrayal. This wasn't just about a house or money anymore. My own family had tried to attack my integrity, my career, and my ability to care for myself. They wanted to control me, force me into their plan, and were willing to lie, manipulate, and involve authorities to get what they wanted. I thought about all the years I had spent helping them, the rides to doctors, the bills I paid, the repairs I handled, the meals I cooked. I had done it out of love, out of responsibility, because they were my parents. And now they were using that same care against me, trying to twist it into guilt and obligation. I realized I had to act carefully. Any wrong move could make me look guilty or uncaring in the eyes of authorities, or even in my own mind if I doubted myself. I started documenting every interaction, calls, messages, visits, and even the whispers I had overheard in their kitchen. Everything would be proof if I needed it. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I had always thought family was a safe place, a place of trust and love. But now, I understood that some people would betray you for their own gain, even the people you called parents. I sat back and took a deep breath, letting the anger and hurt settle into determination. I wouldn't let them manipulate me. I wouldn't let them ruin my reputation or my career. I would protect myself, and I would make sure the truth came out. For the first time, I felt fully aware of just how far they were willing to go, and I knew I had to be ready for whatever came next. After the call from Adult Protective Services, I knew I couldn't let my parents manipulate me anymore. Confronting them directly would only give them more chances to twist the situation. I decided the best way to protect myself was to act quietly, carefully, and deliberately. I began documenting everything. Every call from my parents or Ethan, every strange comment, every fake complaint. I wrote it down in a notebook, noting the date, time, and what was said. I wanted a clear record in case things escalated. When I visited, I started carrying a small audio recorder in my bag. I positioned it discreetly, capturing conversations without them knowing. Every lie, every act of pretending forgetfulness, every subtle attempt to guilt me went straight into my records. At the same time, I contacted their doctor. I explained the situation, careful not to accuse anyone directly, and asked for an evaluation of both Charles and Irene. The doctor reassured me that both of them were fine, showing no signs of Alzheimer's or cognitive decline. I requested written confirmation, knowing that a formal document would be crucial if anyone ever tried to challenge me or use my parents' deception against me. Next, I reached out to a lawyer friend I trusted. I explained the situation without going into unnecessary details, just enough to get advice. My lawyer suggested a no-contact liability clause, a legal document stating that I would not be responsible for my parents' care and protecting me from false claims. I decided to have it drawn up immediately. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about protection, about setting boundaries that couldn't be crossed. I also began quietly researching options in case my parents tried to escalate further. I learned about adult protective laws, legal steps for preventing false claims, and ways to document abuse or manipulation. Every bit of knowledge made me feel stronger. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of a situation that had always seemed out of my hands. Even though anger and hurt still lingered, I focused on being methodical. I refused to let my emotions give them power. Instead, I used them as motivation to be thorough, precise, and careful. Every lie they told, every attempt to guilt me, became a reason to strengthen my defenses. By the end of that week, I felt a sense of calm determination. I had a plan, I had evidence, and I had legal protection. I was ready to handle whatever came next on my terms. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was in control. They had tried to manipulate me, but now the game had changed. I was prepared, and I would not let them win. Christmas was coming, and I got a text from Ethan asking me to join the family dinner. He framed it as like old times, but I knew better. I decided to go, pretending everything was normal. I didn't want to give away my plan, but I also knew this was my chance to confront them in a way that couldn't be denied. The evening started quietly. My parents were cheerful on the surface, but I noticed the little signs, the glances they exchanged, the subtle hints they dropped as if testing me. Dinner was served, and for the first hour, I kept my composure, laughing at the right moments and nodding politely. But then the act began. Irene called me by the wrong name. Then Charles repeated a story from 10 years ago as if they didn't remember it themselves. Ethan sighed dramatically, putting on a show like he was worried about them. I stayed quiet, watching them carefully, letting the tension build. Every glance, every fake stumble, every misnamed comment reminded me of all the planning, lies, and manipulation that had gone on behind my back. When the moment felt right, I stood up slowly and reached for my phone. My hands were steady, my voice calm. "I have something I want everyone to hear," I said. I pressed play and let the recording speak for itself. Irene's voice came through clearly. "If we pretend to lose our memory, she'll have to let us move in." The room went completely silent. I could see Irene freeze, her face paling. Charles stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Ethan muttered under his breath, "Laura, you didn't have to do this," as if I had overstepped some invisible line. I looked around the table calmly and said, "You didn't have to lie." My voice was steady, controlled. The weight of years of manipulation, lies, and betrayal filled the room, and I finally felt the power shift. This time, I held the upper hand. No one tried to interrupt me. The neighbors who had been invited as family friends sat quietly, sensing the tension and seriousness of the moment. I didn't need to yell or argue. The recording was proof. It didn't matter what they said now. Their plan was exposed, and there was no way to deny it. For the first time, I saw the reality of who they really were. Parents who had tried to manipulate me, using lies about their health and guilt about family duty to trap me. But now their lies were out in the open, and I felt a strange sense of relief. The anger and hurt were still there, but so was a new clarity. That night, I realized that I had taken back control. I had prepared carefully, stayed patient, and acted strategically. The betrayal had been sharp and painful, but exposing it gave me strength. For the first time in years, I felt fully in charge of my life and my home. I had fought back quietly, but now my parents couldn't manipulate me anymore. The morning after the dinner, the house felt lighter, almost peaceful. I hadn't realized how tense everything had been until the confrontation was over. The very next day, I noticed that Ethan had stopped texting and calling altogether. It wasn't surprising. He had always sided with my parents, and now the truth was out. I guessed he felt embarrassed, maybe even guilty, and decided to retreat. Word of the confrontation spread quietly through the neighborhood and among family friends. People who had always sympathized with my parents started looking at things differently. The whispered stories of their declining health no longer held weight. I felt a sense of validation as neighbors who once nodded politely now avoided jumping to their defense. The lies they had relied on for so long were crumbling, and it was because I had taken action. Charles and Irene didn't take it well. The phone rang constantly for the next few days. They begged, pleaded, and tried every angle to get me to respond. "Laura, don't ruin our reputation," Irene said during one call, her voice trembling with desperation. Charles was just as persistent, apologizing over and over, claiming they were misunderstood and begging me to forgive them. But I refused to engage. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, and every attempt had been met with manipulation and lies. This time, I wasn't going to give them an opening. I calmly gathered the documents I had collected, the clean cognitive reports from their doctor, the recordings, and my journal entries, and sent them copies along with a legal notice. The notice clearly stated that I would not be responsible for their financial or personal care, and that any further attempts to manipulate or coerce me could have legal consequences. After sending everything, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't just protecting my home and my life. I was protecting my peace of mind. The constant fear that I would be forced into a situation against my will had finally ended. For the first time, I felt justified in standing firm and completely free from their schemes. Days passed and the calls stopped. No more pleas, no more manipulations, no more guilt trips. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing the reality of my family. They had tried to control me, but now their power was gone. I could breathe without the constant tension of wondering what trick they would try next. I spent that weekend reflecting on everything that had happened. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were quieter now, replaced by a sense of control and clarity. I had been pushed to the edge, faced betrayal from the people I loved most, and yet I had emerged stronger. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to set boundaries and actually have them respected. I was finally free, and it felt good. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. I focused on my work at the hospital, throwing myself into long shifts and new responsibilities. Therapy helped too. I spent time untangling years of guilt, frustration, and disappointment that my parents and Ethan had caused. Each session reminded me that their manipulation was not my fault, and that I had every right to protect myself. My parents became increasingly isolated. Neighbors stopped inviting them to gatherings, and family friends, who had once supported them blindly, kept their distance. Without the ability to control me or enlist Ethan's help, they were left to face the consequences of their actions on their own. It was quiet, almost eerily so, but I didn't pity them. The isolation was a natural result of the choices they had made. One afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from Ethan. I hesitated before opening it, my mind running through every possible scenario. When I read the words, my chest tightened. He apologized, admitting everything. He confessed that he had known about their plan all along and had agreed to help in exchange for a promised part of my house. He wrote about the aftermath of his actions, how he had lost his job because he had been distracted and dishonest, how his girlfriend had left him after learning the truth, and most painfully, how he had lost my trust and the trust of our parents. He ended the letter by saying he deserved everything that had happened to him. I set the letter down, my fingers lingering on the envelope. Part of me felt a flicker of something familiar, maybe relief that he was finally honest, but mostly I felt nothing. The betrayal had been too deep, the planning too calculated. Some wounds weren't meant to be healed with an apology. Some people don't get closure simply because they say they're sorry. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My life was moving forward without them. Their words, their schemes, and even Ethan's confession didn't change the fact that I had built boundaries and reclaimed control over my home and my peace. Instead, I focused on myself. I poured my energy into projects at work, spent more time with friends who had always supported me, and allowed myself to enjoy the quiet freedom that came from no longer being manipulated. I even started taking small trips, just to feel independent and unburdened. Looking back, I realized how much strength it had taken to reach this point. Betrayal from family cuts deeper than anything else, but it also taught me how important it is to trust my instincts, to protect myself, and to set limits that cannot be crossed. Ethan's letter sat unopened in a drawer. I didn't need validation from him, and I didn't need his forgiveness. Some betrayals are permanent, and some lessons are learned the hard way. And in this silence, I finally felt what I had been waiting for all along: freedom, clarity, and the quiet assurance that I had done the right thing. A year had passed since everything had unfolded, and I was traveling back to my parents' town for a medical conference. I decided to drive past their old house, more out of curiosity than anything else. As I approached, I noticed the yard was overgrown, the paint on the porch peeling, and the windows dark. No lights were on, no movement inside. It was quiet, almost abandoned. I didn't stop. I didn't feel the urge to knock or check on them. As I drove away, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I fully understood that I didn't owe them anything. Not forgiveness. Not guilt. Not a second chance. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I had protected my life, my home, and my peace, and that was enough. Their absence in my life no longer felt like a loss. It felt like freedom. That night, in the hotel room, I pulled out my journal. I wrote slowly, carefully, each word carrying the weight of everything I had endured. They tried to steal my peace through lies. But I found my peace by walking away. Writing it down felt like a final release, a way to acknowledge the hurt without letting it control me. I thought back over the year, the calls, the recordings, the legal documents, and the confrontation at Christmas. Each step had been painful, but it had also been necessary. I realized that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. I had allowed them to manipulate and control me for too long, and walking away had finally reclaimed what was mine, my autonomy and my sense of security. As I closed the journal, I felt a strange sense of gratitude mixed with sadness. Gratitude, because the experience had shown me my own strength, my ability to stay calm under pressure, and my capacity to take control when others tried to steal it. Sadness, because the people who were supposed to love and protect me had chosen manipulation and lies instead. But even the sadness was tempered by understanding. I couldn't change them, and I didn't have to. That night, I finally allowed myself to relax completely. I realized that family, no matter how close by blood, doesn't automatically deserve a place in your life if they bring harm instead of love. I had spent too many years believing that loyalty and care would be enough to protect relationships, but some lessons only come the hard way. Lying in bed, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I didn't have to replay the manipulations, the whispers, or the guilt. They existed in the past, and I existed in the present. The clarity was liberating. I understood now that walking away wasn't just an act of defense, it was an act of self-respect. For the first time in years, I slept without tension in my shoulders, without the fear of a call or a message that could pull me back into their lies. I had finally let go of the family that had caused me so much pain, and in doing so, I had found a peace that no betrayal could take from me. Blood didn't mean love, but walking away had given me freedom, and that was more than I could have hoped for.